Hi to everybody. I'm going to talk about the scientific expertise of last year. First of all, the background and the adopted approach. So the effects on isolated dams. And also to present you a few conclusions. The expertise started with the reform of the quantitative management and the definition of volumes that we can take off from the streams, and for the territorial projects, the possibility to finance dams of substitution. The impact studies with cumulative effects on catchment areas. So we have got several projects, ongoing projects, and see the results on the basin. So at the beginning of the expertise, we realized that we were missing some tools from the point of view of our bureau and also from part of the government. And we were also missing tools and methods in order to plan dams at the level of catchment areas. The Ministry of Environment, Energy and the Sea decided to carry out a study with INRA as well in order to study this issue. It is to illustrate the basin. So all these small blue dots, they are streams on this department. You can imagine that it is difficult to assess the effects of all these streams. The objectives of the expertise, it was to make available methodological elements allowing to improve police procedures on the cumulative impact of dams and to give elements in order to assess the impact of dams already present on the catchment area. So the experts visited 3 catchment areas, so the Doubs Basin in Ardèche with 600 dams, the Vendée Basin, and also the Midour Basin in the Landes and Gers departments. It is significantly deployed as well. So 3 phases, the last one, the feedback on operational questions. I'm going to talk mainly about the second phase, scientific collective expertise in a defined framework. It is a mission for investigation. It is to shed light on technical questions and also to have an overview of the scientific know published in uncertainties, controversies, gaps, and it is based on scientific literature. I've put the link to have access to the project of the expertise, synthesis for decision makers, and an executive summary. They are translated into English. A few examples of questions asked to which we wanted to give answers. For example, how to characterize effect to short and long run for all the dams in aquatic area. Do we have relevant indicators? The positioning in the landscapes and for the streams. How can we put in evidence threshold effects? Which are the skills, tools, methodologies, data to reply to these questions? And by characteristic functional, we were talking about physical and biological characteristics.
So we've split it between hydrogeology, solid transport, hydromorphology, physics and chemical parameters, and quality, biology and ecology. We found different definitions and we looked at all the different effects. The cumulated effect of water retentions, looking at all these characteristics. For this type of catchment area, we looked at all the different sections and all the different water retentions. And in order to have a framework, we didn't really define a maximum size. We decided water retentions below 1 million cubic meter, but we could adapt this parameter. Our approach was, of course, reading a lot of literature on the topic. We have about 1,000 references. We analyzed the effect of one impoundment on functional characteristics and cumulated effect of impoundments, looking at the process, the scope, the interactions between the different impacts, the study methods we could use, and looking at the determining and influencing factors. We wanted to identify first order, second order, third order, different levels interactions, not just for one water retention, but for all the water retentions on one basin as well, which can make things a bit more complicated. So the first findings were that water retentions, impoundments are very different. There are different uses, different water feed methodologies, management methods, and there are also different characteristics, intrinsic characteristics like the size, the flow, the way the water comes in, and the position of the water retention in the basin and in relation to the water stream. So the scientists drew profiles based on the feed water type. This had a high impact on. So we looked at reservoirs fed in by the ground or by hills or derived from the stream or at dam levels, which are the ones we think about most often, most of the time. So the second finding was that there were shortfalls in literature regarding certain functional characteristics and certain types of water retention. I will tell you more about this in a minute. So what is the impact of an isolated water retention? The conclusion is that the impact is on all the functional characteristics for regarding the flow, the concentration, the storage characteristics, the dynamics and seasonality of the outlet related to the inlet float. So we notice that there is a loss of water for the downstream river because of evaporation and sampling. It's also a sediment trap which modifies the riverbed downstream. And we see phosphorus, metal traces, pesticides. It can become a nitrogen well, phosphorus well, carbon well. And it usually leads to a higher eutrophication downstream, as well as we see an evolution of the temperature and oxygen concentration. In terms of biology, we see the living communities change downstream, but also upstream and in the water retention itself. What we see is an evolution in the community structure, different biological traits and ecological traits of the species, and usually it's easier to implement problematic species. So the characteristics of an isolated retention include different characteristics. We need to look at the upstream basin, the geology, topography, pedology, ground, occupation, agriculture in this area. In the water retention, we need to look at the volume, surface, feedwater mode, restitution mode, sampling, habits, the watershed, and the position in relation to the water stream. And in the downstream river, we need to look at the flow rate, substrate, see if there are any more streams feeding into this stream, and the style in terms of morphology, shape. So we saw that there are many diverse possibilities for these three characteristics, leading to many different water retention types. So it was impossible to find direct indicators which could be applied to each type. But what we noticed was that it was significant to see where the water retention is located in the basin and to see if there are connections between them. As you can see, we have here water retentions close to the stream, on the stream, and here this could be a watershed for this stream. We have just one stream, one retention on this stream. So all of these characteristics came into play in our study. So even if we couldn't find indicators which are directly transferable, we noticed there are typical effects on the water retention. There are some models which we can use and specific characteristics for French water retention. So what did we find regarding hydrology? The main effect is the reduction of annual flow rates. There is a stronger impact, higher impact on years with less rain. So we found peak flow rate and low flow times, which are usually impacted. And the experts saw that the cumulated effect indicators are not so relevant worldwide. So they have to be designed and they have to be validated according to different scales. So you can see here, for example, the annual flow rate reduction in blue. Here in cubic meters per square kilometer, we don't see a direct link in the same way here on this line flow rate and on the vertical line the surface, the area. So graphs have been compiled and we don't see direct correlation between the different effects I just mentioned. So what are the digital models we found? They look like these ones on the slide. We thought this could be used as a main assessment approach. We have here the hydrate balance for agricultural dams, cumulated impact for agricultural dams. So then we have been asking ourselves, is it relevant to reproduce these spatial representation modes? One of the challenges we met was how do we take into account the usage of the water, the sampling pace in water retentions when it's used to water agricultural fields, for example, and how do we take into account the changes in this uses and the impact on the basin characteristics. And we didn't find so much information here in scientific papers in terms of water streams themselves. We found information regarding large dams, and for the Trois Gorges Dam we found some data, but we wanted to study the impact of the stream morphology, so we found a change in the sediments flow. They usually act as a sediments well, which could mean a reduced transfer of sediments downstream and a changes in the trapping because of silting. Here is the impact in the graph. So regarding the morphology, we see the migration of the water stream channels. So we thought it's important to take into account the erosion and the sediments in this water retention, and so we found that it was difficult to draw performant models, ways to forecast the amount of sediments which will be retained or will be transferred, and to study the cumulative effect. Actually, we do need to take this context into account. So the physical and chemical parameters also was not described in so much detail in scientific papers. So we thought and found that it was really important to find out how the water retentions are located and connected. What could influence that would be temperature, oxygen concentration. You can see here in this graph the characteristic of one parameter in water retentions. Between upstream and downstream, if we have water retentions close together, there is a cumulative effect. If there is a long distance between water retention, there is not so much cumulative effect. Here are graphs describing the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus flow. Here we see that they add up with a cumulative effect. On the left-hand side, the cumulative effect in the Orgeval basin. With the nitrates, you can see a growing cumulative effect and reducing denitrification. And on the right-hand side, this is on the Lot basin with phosphorus availability over thousands, hundreds of years. So again, regarding biological compartments of water streams and catchment areas, again, we didn't have so much information in scientific papers, but we identified complex effects potentially in the food web and the habitat, modifications on environmental conditions in connectivity. We see a diminution of or reduction of the food for the fishes. Some bioindicators are also relevant. We see, for example, the methods linking hydrological modifications and the fish communities. And environment fermentation and population viability methods are also developing. This is an illustration to show the vulnerability of a site on the left-hand side. If we take into account a landscape with several lakes, it shows which sites should be removed first, which ones are vulnerable. So what we found is that it is really important to try and list all the water retentions and their characteristics. We don't have a database, one unique specific database. So we need to gather information, to gather the quality, to gather the data and improve their quality. We identified that it can be difficult to see the characteristics of the water retention, as I explained. So it could be useful to get remote detection to see the diverse characteristics, the position of the water retention, the characteristics, the surface, the volume, the water quality, and the habitats. So this implementation is very technical. It doesn't necessarily give us access to essential data like connections between water retentions, sampling dynamics, so we have to really investigate in the field. conclusions are that this study showed we need to research further and develop methods. We need to get some data on catchment areas to develop our knowledge of the biogeological and chemical processes. We need to focus on functional characteristics interactions. Often in scientific papers, we could read the impact of one functional characteristic, but not necessarily the interactions. We see chemical parameters, biological parameters studied separately. And we also need to study the retroactive effect. So we found a lot of data, some data in the literature regarding the dams and hill water retentions, but we didn't necessarily find data on reservoirs, derived retentions. We didn't see a lot in the literature on the water retention outlet into the downstream, and so we need to acquire more knowledge and create models on sampling. So we think we need to develop two types of methods. One would be integrated models, and the other would be an approach, a systematic approach to landscape definition, where the water retentions are located and what are the connections. We found that we could focus on several areas. As we said, if there is a water retention on a catchment area, then there will be an impact on functional characteristics. So we need to assess the significance of these effects, define the challenges, better define the dams themselves, find the cumulative effect with integrated scales. For example, find the characteristics of the downstream basins, of the smaller basins. We have sometimes retentions on hills which are not necessarily legally authorized or administratively listed because of their small effect, but the cumulated effect of all these small retentions can create vulnerabilities. So we need to identify the effects and these basins. Through this study, we found that we need to pay attention to large scales, large time and space scales. What would be the effect on the sea, water, the sediments? What would be the effect over dozens of years because of biological behaviors? And we need to create a database, find the water retentions as a list, the different uses, and management methods. So what we suggest to do is create the approach, the methods to assess cumulative effects. This will be published in July 2017. Thank you for your attention.